I'm building the biggest Titan in the Warhammer 40k universe, and it's time for another update. At 40k scale, the Imperator Titan stands over 7 feet tall, complete with fortress legs, massive guns, and a cathedral on its back. With its outrageous scale, it's without a doubt the biggest project I've ever undertaken. In this video, I'm building a gun worthy of this gigantic war machine, one of the largest weapons in the Warhammer 40k universe, the Plasma Annihilator. This video is sponsored by Into the AM. Since the beginning of this project, I've been using the old epic scale Imperator Titan as a guide for the overall appearance of my Titan. I'm not trying to recreate it one for one, but I think it has an iconic look and feel to it that I've always wanted to capture. It's ornate, it's archaic, and it's cartoonishly impractical. It's a grimacing skull hunched under the weight of a cathedral on its back. In a symbolic sense, I think its stooped over posture communicates that it's burdened both literally and figuratively with the dogma and tradition and ignorance of the age. It's the ultimate expression of form over function, and the function is debatable at best. Now, back when I blocked in the skeleton for this Titan, I made PVC T-fittings on the sides of the torso where a length of pipe can be socketed in to support the arms. This will give a robust connection point that will make the arms stable enough to sit in the correct position, and will also allow me to disassemble the Titan easily for moving and storage. I originally blocked in the shape of the guns with some length of pipe as well, and I measured and eyeballed carefully and got just the proportion I wanted, so I'm going to build my arm around this framework. Alright, so the attachment point of the arms here, my plan is to drill a hole through here and have sort of a pin system to attach the arms, but to do that I need to glue this piece into this thing, which means lifting this whole thing up, taking it to the garage, and doing a little bit of pipe welding. Let's do it. So one of the few very smart things I did while building this thing is allowing it to be disassembled into pieces. The torso just lifts right off the central column. Now, with the whole torso in the garage, I set about the work of gluing this little nub into the socket. I start by chamfering the pipe piece a little bit with a file, then apply some purple primer and some pipe glue. I hold it in while it sets so the heat from the chemical reaction doesn't partially pop it out again. This just goes to kind of highlight why this whole project is so tricky. On a model this big, even gluing a relatively small piece together is a bit of an ordeal. So I glued the arm pipes together too, and please don't look too closely at the glue on these ones here. This isn't exactly red steel work, but you know what, decades of sewage is not going to flow through these bad boys, so I think it'll be alright. In any event, I mark off the cuff of the shoulder socket, then with a drill, I drill through the cuff to make some holes. I put the arm back on the Titan, making sure that I align it right, and drill some corresponding holes onto the shoulder nub. Now I can slot a little bit of brass rod through there and be pretty confident this thing won't fall off at an inopportune time. Hell yeah. Now, compared to the Epic model, the shoulder connection of my Titan skeleton is pretty low on the torso. If you look closely at the shoulder joint of the Epic Titan, it's kind of a big round joint that disappears into the platform above, without much concession to how that might actually work. And I realized quickly that I needed to make the illusion that this joint was just a little bit higher up the side of the Titan's torso. So in the service of this, I glued a strip of insulation foam to the outside of the Titan's upper arm. This will give me the angle that I need so I can start blocking in the rest of the gun's geometry. Back on my desk, I prop up the arm with 2 special pieces of foam that are cut to hold this thing upright so I can look at it. Then I add some nice square pieces of insulation foam with holes cut in the center, the same diameter as the PVC pipe. This will give me a nice square geometric reference for the rest of the details of this gun. PVC and ABS pipe is already not the lightest material in the world, so I need to be very conscious about the weight on this thing. The gun that I'm making is called the Plasma Annihilator, and it's one of the most powerful weapons in the 40k universe. Originally developed from designs for weapons fitted for the giant broadsides of void ships, its firepower is jaw-dropping. It's said that even the process of firing it is a destructive act in of itself. The roar of this thing going off is deafening, and the sound alone will shatter glass for a kilometer in all directions. When the plasma blast hits its target, the furious discharge of energy is comparable to that of a small sun, and its target is instantly vaporized. One shot will leave a crater hundreds of meters in diameter, the sides of which are fused into thick glass from the incredible heat. The Plasma Annihilator is a true Titan killer, a weapon capable of turning even a massive orc gargant into nothing but hot slag with just one shot. This thing is no joke. Warlord class Titans are fitted with a junior version of this weapon called the Sun Fury class Plasma Annihilator, and those guns are pretty big and pretty cool. But as I've discussed in previous episodes of this build, when it comes to the Imperator class Titan, we're talking about a Titan that's over 3 times larger. There are lots of charts out there showing that an Emperor class Titan should only be slightly larger than a Warlord Titan, but there are plenty of passages in the lore that contradict this. All of this is to say that my version of this iconic weapon needs to be much, much larger. Now if you compare the design of the Sun Fury Plasma Annihilator on the Warlord Titan to the one on the Epic Titan, they have basically nothing in common. Perhaps most notable, the large plasma coils, which have become a recognizable feature on plasma weapons, are not there. There is this one ridged piece over the center which could debatably be called a plasma coil, but the whole thing is so old and low poly that there's not much we can say for certain. It does, however, have this distinctive tip, a squarish tapering cone that frames the muzzle of the gun. I thought this would be a good stylistic element to keep, so I set about making one. I started by making some designs in the approximate shape I thought I'd need, and then transferring them into Chipboard to make some jigs. Cutting a bunch of layers of foam, I made a rough block of the nozzle shape. I made a second set of jigs for the profile, and soon realized the whole thing was much too big for my hot wire cutter. So I cut the whole thing in half, cut the profile with my jigs, and then glued it back together. I sanded this shape with sandpaper, tapering the corners to make a smooth and even dome. The original design features 10 grooves set into rounded cut-ins that taper towards the end. In an attempt to make this shape, I carefully marked out their placement, then melted a pilot line in place with my hot glue gun. To make a smooth and rounded indent, I glued some sandpaper to a wooden dowel, then inserted this bit into my power drill. With a bit of careful drilling, I was able to bore out 10 grooves. And I'm left with... damn it. Alright, well, okay, after sanding and shaping, I'm left with this thing, which, doesn't look great, if I'm honest. Kind of crude, not really the shape that I wanted, and when you put it on the end of the gun, it looks kind of, how do I say this, sus? So I made another one, and that's this one here. It's a little bit more tapered. It's a little bit, it's perfectly conical. I didn't try to get that rounded square shape this time. And I think this one's a lot better. Alright, with my new nozzle shape, it's time to block in the rest of this gun with some cool looking stuff. Luckily, I've been saving some bits for this exact moment. I've been stockpiling old toys and interesting looking bits of plastic for this project for a while. So let's go through them and see if we can find some good stuff. There's lots of potential here, but I'm going to need to break it down into usable chunks before we can start kit bashing some of these pieces together. I've collected a lot of interesting looking toy guns, and a lot of cool looking vehicles as well that are covered in mechanical detail. By cutting up and mixing these pieces together, I should be able to get a lot of really interesting mechanical detail. So before I start breaking down all these different toys that I got at the thrift store, I wanted to talk about something that I like to do. One of the things I like to do is Google what exactly I have, or check on eBay at least. So this is a Dino Trucks Triceratops. It's currently selling for somewhere between $25 and $60 on eBay. And I paid $3 for it. I'm gonna cut it up anyways, because look at that detail. It's incredible. One day I might find something at the thrift store and look it up, and it'll be like selling for $1,200, and in that case I probably won't cut it up. I want to take a moment to thank the sponsor of today's video, Into the AM. Into the AM makes a range of high quality shirts. I'm currently wearing the waffle knit crew shirt, which is part of their fall line that they sent me to try out, and I have to say I really enjoy it so far. The fit is good, it's comfortable, the material feels really nice on my skin. They're the exact sort of basic staples that you want to have in your wardrobe, especially if you live somewhere cold like I do. I live in Canada, so I'm always looking for shirts that layer really well, that are warm and comfortable, and this fits the bill exactly. Into the AM is probably best known for their graphic shirts, but if you go to their website and check out the new fall collection, they have all kinds of good solid basics as well, and it's the sort of thing that's right up my alley, so I'm happy to recommend it to you guys. Into the AM is currently having a huge site-wide sale, and if you click the link in the description box below, you'll get an additional 10% off of everything using my link. Thanks Into the AM for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to it. One of the cool toys I found was this old toy train. I went at it with screwdrivers and was able to break it down into a ton of nice little bits. Not a bad haul for just one toy. With my bits ready to work with, I start blocking in the areas of the gun. I found this bit of a hull of some sort of sci-fi vehicle with an interesting shape. This piece needs some holes filled with stuff before it can be attached, so I cut some pieces of foam to fill them up. I plan to add details all over all of this later, but this is a good first step. The body of one of these toy trains has a great shape and a ton of detail, so I'll put that on right here. I particularly like these nubby bits that are sticking out from it. On the other side, I'll put that sci-fi boat piece. And as you can see, this gun is not going to be totally symmetrical. I think that'll make it more interesting looking. So in a fit of madness, I took this other train toy and I put it on the bottom of the gun pretty much as is. I think it's a great shape and it won't be too recognizable as a train once I've blended it in with other details. I found this chunk of toy gun of some sort and I thought it would make a great addition to the back of the gun. It had some text on it though, so I filed that off first. I also added a bit of PVC pipe to the inside so it could slot right into the pipe fitting. This is already looking kinda cool. At this point, I started to think about the shoulder joint, so I built a housing for where the arm meets the body to suggest some interesting mechanical joint. I used curved lines to echo the style of the Titan's body, and then I glued it all together. Once it was ready, I glued it into place above the arm socket. I found this sniper scope toy, and I thought it would make a nice large piston to suggest some hydraulics controlling the arm. This will help with the stability and raising the arm. I cut it to length and test fitted above the arm joint. Not bad, but something's kind of off here. So I want to fill in more above the joint here to make the arm look straighter and make the joint look a bit more logical. So with a bit of sloping foam, I glue in a piece, and then using 2-part epoxy sculpt putty, I fill in around it. Since this is a part that connects to the Titan, it's important that this part is really durable. Back on the body of the gun, at this point I ripped off part of the square foam block that was my guide to give myself more room for details and bits. I then bulked out the back part with the side of that same Dino Trucks toy. That looks pretty cool. So, one of the most distinctive elements of any plasma weapon is the coil. They're usually a pretty noticeable stylistic element of any plasma weapon. As I mentioned before, there isn't really an obvious plasma coil on the Plasma Annihilator, but I felt like it should have one anyways. I soon realized I didn't have any bits that would adequately represent one, so I decided to make my own and 3D print it. This was pretty easy. You just make one coil segment, then use an array modifier and scale it to what you need. Not bad. Here's the coil all printed out. It's longer than most tanks. No big deal. I had some real trouble trying to decide how to put this on the gun and how to make it look like it fit naturally with the design of the whole weapon. I ended up gluing it down directly to the barrel, then building up some side pieces made from the pump handle of a Super Soaker, which I trimmed and modified and glued to some PVC board. Once glued in place, these make a nice little housing for the plasma coil with some channels on either side. I'm not at all sure I'm happy with this design because the coil is not really visible from the sides, but there's been so much inertia that I just made the decision to go with it and keep moving forward. If I agonize over every little piece like I've been doing, this project will never get done. You can't let perfect be the enemy of good sometimes. I found this cool bit from an old 80s toy and mounted it to the back, making a nice detailed spot that looks like the origin of the coils. Then built up some geometry and detail on the front with another little bit of toy that I can't remember the origin of. I started using some small bits of foam to build up a boxy chassis around where this PVC T-joint is, knowing that I wanted to make a joint here that looks like it's capable of moving the gun in all axes so it could properly aim. This means constructing a little saddle joint, but only a partial version so that I can stick it onto the strange sloping shape underneath. This was pretty tricky, but I ended up getting a snug fit by using some foam clay. I squished it into place, making sure it was centered with everything and then trimming away the excess. The lower part here will be hidden, but this is going to go a long way towards giving the illusion of a logical joint here. I used some more foam clay to bulk up the area behind those thin bits of water gun as well, allowing me to get a nice fit and add some extra detail on the barrel right before the nozzle. Now speaking of the nozzle, I knew at the very least that this piece would have to be much smoother. So I started by adding some spackle, also known as drywall joint compound, to the shape, smoothing it with a wet hand. When that was dry, I gave it some work with some 220 grit sandpaper to smooth down any ridges. With a bit of spare pipe, I threw together a holder for this piece. Then using some waterproof wood glue thinned with a bit of water, I brushed on what I hoped would be a protective coating. This seemed to work pretty well, but I got lots of tiny bubbles formed, but those went away after some more brushing, and after 2 coats I got a decently durable surface that was pretty smooth. Not bad. To add some durability to the crucial rotation point above the saddle joint on the arm, I clad the foam with some thin card. I think I need to start doing this sort of cladding process on a lot of the foam surfaces, but when I keep going back and forth in terms of design, it makes no sense to do that yet. Now I knew I wanted the arms to look like they were coming from higher up, and I was unsatisfied with my first design, so I designed a shoulder joint that would give a large and robust connection to the Titan's body while adding something cool to the silhouette as well. This joint is very much like the ones on the Imperial Knights, which adds some nice tie-in to that same design philosophy. So with a large knife, I carefully removed the old shoulder joint and then applied the new one. I didn't reinforce the attachment yet because I know I'm going to have to tinker with it later, which means I'm probably going to have to pull it off, but overall I think it looks pretty good. I made an upper arm piece using some 2-inch foam, cutting some details into it to make it a little bit less blocky. Once assembled, I stick it onto the upper arm, slotting into the joint above. The whole arm thus goes on and off like this. Although not at all load-bearing in real life, I think this new connection gives the appearance of a much more robust and logical design than what I had before, so I'm happy with that. I continue adding details to the gun, this time with the driver's seat from a bulldozer toy. I fill the back with foam clay to get a nice fit despite the unusual shape. I'm getting to a level where I'm having difficulty deciding what looks good because the colors are so distracting. It's time to just take a break from adding kit bashing pieces to it and just give it some paint. I start by adding a mix of black paint and varnish to cover up all the foam areas, and I have to say it's always gratifying to see the pink color disappear. This step will hopefully protect the foam areas from the next step, which is taking it out to the garage and spraying it with some gray primer. Wow, with gray primer on it, this thing is looking very much more like I want it to. Now I've come to a realization about the process for this Titan. One of the things that I need to do is to harden and coat all the exposed foam areas for durability. I always had in mind that this would happen after everything was finished with final details, but it's becoming more clear to me that this will be easier to do before too many fine details are applied, as the coating substances I'll be using for durability will probably create a loss of detail in fine tiny surfaces like the ones that Warhammer has all over them. So this means that little details like rivets and wires and tiny bits of greeble need to wait until after the whole structure has been filled and sealed and then applied over the top. This may sound like a simple thing, but it actually represents a very significant breakthrough in how I've been thinking about this Titan, and to be honest, it kind of feels like a clear path forward that I haven't had this whole time. Now the good news is that step is not too far away right now, but I genuinely cannot wait to make this thing not pink anymore. This project is dragging on more than I'd like, but damn it, we are making good progress, and this thing is so cool. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next episode. A huge thank you to all my patrons for their continued support. By the way, if you join my Patreon, you can get your name on the finished Titan. I'll put a link in the description below. Thanks again to Into the AM for sponsoring this video. Remember to use my link in the description box below to get an additional 10% off everything. Thanks for tuning in, everyone, and we'll see you next time on Eric's Hobby Workshop.